Joining us is the Director of National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. Welcome, Mr. Director. Analyze the U.S.-China takeaway. Yes, sir. Thank you. Analyze the takeaways from the U.S.-China agreement, verbal or otherwise, as we currently know them.
Right. Well, the U.S.-China agreement is just a terrific deal negotiated by President Trump. What it does is it makes sure that the parts of the imports from China that go into our economy and could potentially be bottlenecks are no longer being threatened to be shut down. And the Chinese are also buying a heck of a lot of soybeans and other things from our farmers, which they had neglected to do over the last few months. And meanwhile, our tariffs on China remain in place much higher than they were in January. So I would say that we've put more pressure on China. We worked out a collegial deal with two friends, President Xi and President Trump. But in the end, we came out ahead because we've got the tariff revenue from China, and China's taken everything back to about where we were in January.
All right, let me switch to the U.S. economy. The market is reaching all-time highs. Is this a sugar high, or can it be sustained? I mean, it seems like almost every week all I see is green. I don't see that much red anymore.
Well, you know, markets go up and down, so people shouldn't be counting on it always going up. But the fact is that President Trump is promising to deliver a golden age for the American economy. And if that happens, it's going to be great for America's workers and great for America's corporations. In part, that's because what President Trump has always recognized is true, that if we create a climate that is strong for business, then it's also going to create a lot of jobs and be strong for workers. The thing that I'm most happy about is we're seeing really high wage growth, especially for people at the bottom, and we're seeing consumers be really, really optimistic. So right now, year-over-year consumption is about 6 or 7% higher than it was last year, which means that people have more money in their pockets and they're spending it.
All right, let me pivot to the shutdown. It is definitely impacting life for our fellow Americans. Do you think it will eventually, or is it now, impacting the broader economy?
Yeah, it definitely is. It's really important that the Democrats stop messing around with people's food and with the salaries for the 750,000 workers that depend on the government to, pay the bills for their kids and their families. We got to get the government open. And the fact is that right now, our estimate of the harm for the current quarter is probably about 0.5% lower GDP, which is a real loss for America. I don't really understand what the Democrats are doing, and I'm not sure they understand what they're doing now. This is the second longest shutdown in American history, and they're putting everything from food stamps to everything else on the table for what reason? It feels like they've lost their minds to me.
Yeah, I was there for the now second longest shutdown. All right, let me ask you about the Fed. Jerome Powell cuts rates, and then he says that he might be the Grinch at Christmas. He says he can't drive in the fog, but cars have fog lights. What is he talking about?
The thing that I was disappointed in, I was glad that they cut rates. And the thing that I was disappointed in the Jay's statement is that since the last meeting where everybody said they were going to cut 3 times, and that's what futures markets expected, we've had a government shutdown, which makes, as we just said, GDP growth go down, puts less pressure on inflation. And we got the one inflation report since the last Fed meeting that showed that it was much tamer than expected. In fact, at Bloomberg, 43 economists forecasted what inflation would be, and it came in below every single one of those 43 forecasts. And so with inflation down and surprising, and with economic growth perhaps slowing a bit because of the shutdown, it doesn't make sense that all of a sudden they would say, hey, we're not going to cut rates in December. And so I still worry that the Fed has become a partisan body, and, we'll see.
All right, Kevin, we had some success with one country that starts with C. Let me ask you about one a little bit closer to home, Canada. Do you see a trade deal on the horizon with our neighbors to the north, and what will it take to get to that point?
Yeah, it's been a tough negotiation, but we're still hopeful that it'll move forward. You know, I have to tip my cap to the fans of the Toronto Blue Jays. I mean, what a great World Series we just saw from two great teams. I know they're pretty disappointed today, but you know, in the end, we've got to move Canada and Mexican trade deals forward, and it's been much harder in Canada than Mexico. I think in part because there's a left-wing government in Canada that reminds quite a bit of the Democrats here in the U.S., and so they're almost never Trumpy at times, and I think that's something that we have to get over in order to close a final deal.
All right, we'll leave with the World Series. For those who didn't watch it, it looked like Kevin Hassett on the dance floor, that little toe tap that the catcher did, or else Toronto would have won the World Series. I thought of you or Fred Astaire when I saw that. Thank you for joining us, Kevin, on a Sunday night.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Take care. Joining us are Republican strategist Katie Zachariah and former Biden press chief of staff Yemisi Egbawale. Thank you both for joining us, and welcome. Yemisi, some things in life should not be hard. When Republicans use racially repugnant words or sanitize Hitler or sanitize sexual assault, it is disqualifying. Why can't Abigail Spanberger admit that Jay Jones has no business being the top prosecutor in Virginia?
Well, I definitely think Abigail Spanberger should have unendorsed Jay Jones. I think it would have sent a stronger signal of accountability there. But I think it's telling how he hasn't even really been able to drag her down. Selfishly, that was a lot of the concern for a lot of Democrats, is Jay Jones, this weak man who decided to enter a race knowing that he had those text messages out there, beating a woman, Shannon Taylor, who ran as well for the Democratic ticket and would have been a great candidate. Is he somebody that was going to pull down Abigail Spanberger, a really strong center-left pragmatic candidate? And I'm glad to see he hasn't, but it's been disappointing that she didn't unendorse.
Well, that is refreshing. You are honest, so thank you. It's your first time on the show. We're going to have you back. That was very honest. All right, Katie. New York will pick between a socialist and a sexual harasser. In 2021, Republicans wanted Cuomo out as governor for myriad reasons, and I am trying to follow the logic of how he is unfit to be governor, but somehow some Republicans think he is acceptable as mayor.
Well, I think what we're looking at really is much more the fact that Zohran Mamdani is the worst of all candidates possible. And it looks like a race to the bottom, though it has been outspoken. Secretary Bessent, President Trump, and other leaders have said, honestly, Zohran Mamdani would be the best thing for the Republican Party at this point, because all the policies are just straight out there. They're not going to go bail him out, as Secretary Bessent said he would say what Gerald Ford said, which is drop dead when he comes for a bailout, because he can't afford these communist policies and programs. And so, look, Zohran really is the bellwether for the United States of what happens when you have unfettered migration and no voter ID in New York City. And honestly, the backing of Cuomo I just think it's really okay, we don't want to back Zohran, so now we're going to back Cuomo. But really, Zohran would be a great thing for the United States, for the Republican Party, because he will not succeed. His policies will not succeed, and he will ultimately go to the bailout for President Trump, which he has said he will absolutely not give him.
Wow, a socialist versus a sexual harasser. What a choice. Yemisi, I watched an interview you did where crime came up. And to me, crime is a tax on poor people. They can't move to a gated community. They can't erect tall fences around their homes. But some Democrats are often on the wrong side with respect to crime. How big of an issue is that? And do you think Democrats nationally need to kind of revisit their position on progressive prosecutors and crime as a whole?
Yes, I think that tackling the crime issue for both parties is going to be a gateway for the suburban voters, which is that gold that we know wins for elections. I don't know how, as Democrats, we became the party where Joe Biden wrote the 1994 crime bill, Bill Clinton passed it, and now we've gotten to a place where we talk about defunding the police. It feels that a lot of cultural ideology has come into the conversation about law enforcement. And look, can we talk about gaps and issues and dysfunctions when it comes to policing, local policing? Yes, we can. But instead of having conversations about reform, we changed it to defund. And when you talk about defunding the police, you ignore the plight of communities that oftentimes rely on that law enforcement. A lot of the people having the conversations about reducing minimums, about having teenagers in and out of prison, not even really keeping them inside, and not having any sentencing for minors. Those are people that live in communities that are not directly affected by crime. When you go inside of those communities, oftentimes black and brown, and you ask them, what can we do to help you? They say, I want you to protect my child. I live and I work and I want to come to a community and I want to come to a home that I feel is safe. And what a lot of progressives do is they throw statistics and they say, well, we've reduced it here and we've reduced crime by 30% here, things like that. When people walk down the street, that is how they measure crime. They don't measure crime by a number that you put on a fact sheet and you tweet out online. And I think we've just got to get back to having direct conversations with the community and making people feel like we understand what they're going through.
Yeah, crime and public safety are as much a perception as it is a reality. So, Katie, speaking of police, Congresswoman Nancy Mace had a psychotic episode this week at an airport in South Carolina, cursing at police officers who apparently did not escort her well enough through some special line at the airport. By the way, for the record, I never used police to get to an airport in the 8 years I was in Congress, and I had a ton of death threats, mainly from my family, but I had a bunch of them. Does it matter how candidates act anymore? I mean, do voters care how candidates talk to police officers or treat TSA agents or act in their personal lives?
The short answer is yes, they do care, and I'll invoke Ronald Reagan's "thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican" 11th commandment. However, President Trump has very much set the record as we are to respect. We are the party of law and order. We are a nation that respects our police officers. And I would urge Nancy Mace, accidents happen, whether it was a misunderstanding on which car she was arriving in, to have a deference for our law enforcement because they are doing an incredible job. They were there to protect her. And I think an apology is well deserved for those police officers, to be honest. But again, that's up to Nancy Mace. Our president has, again, set a very clear precedent on how we respect and treat the police force.
Yeah, God help a member of Congress that actually has to navigate an airport on his or her own. All right, we got about 60 seconds, so I'm going to be fair and split it 30 each. What will be the takeaways on Tuesday night? Katie, we'll start with you, and then we'll leave 30 seconds for Yemisi.
Well, wow, I'd love to see Prop 50 fail, but it's not looking like that out here in California for redistricting. I mean, Zohran is still looking like he's polling, though Cuomo says the more voters, the better. We'll see what happens in that race. With Jay Jones, I think that's going to be a clear smackdown. Miyares is going to win. I truly believe that, and I think he deserves that win. Spanberger, it looks like Spanberger is definitely the candidate that we're going to see, although I do think Chitterelli in New Jersey is polling pretty well, and it's looking good there. So success and failure, we'll see, to be determined.
All right, Yemisi.
Well, I just have to say that I believe that centrists in the Democratic Party are the silent majority, and I believe a success for Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill will be telling of that, even with Zohran winning in New York City. And I hope for Republicans this is a sign. Winston Sears was not a great candidate. She was not a strong following to what I believe was a successful governor in Glenn Youngkin, and I hope that Democrats and Republicans, we work on the candidates that we roll out.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, both of you, and for your civility to one another, and for letting me know there are actually 11 commandments and not 10. I always heard there were 10, but now I know there are 11. There's actually a 12th. There have to be 4 SEC teams in the college playoffs. Thank you both for joining us on a Sunday night. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.